All right, we'll go ahead and call the special meeting to order. And today we're here to discuss the compensation and classification study. With that, I'll turn it over to the manager.
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Today we're going to do a presentation on where we are with respect to the compensation and classification study that the board authorized actually back in your fiscal year 17-18 budget, and then you also appropriated some money in current year budget for actual implementation of such a study. You're going to have three presenters before you today, Michael James and Mark Watson, who kind of served as co-project managers on the county staff that have been working on this particular project. And then we have with us also Nancy Berkeley with Evergreen, who is our consultants who have been doing most of the work as it relates to this particular study. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you, Ms. President. Good afternoon, Commissioners. We appreciate your time to talk about our compensation and classification study. Staff have been working on this project for about 6 months or so. And so throughout the process, now we're starting to get some information back from the consultant where some decision points need to be made. So it was a natural point to come back to the board and talk about what we've done so far, what we're doing currently, and what will be coming before the board and the management team as we move forward. So our agenda today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategic initiatives that the county is working on. We're working on several global projects that are really designed to prepare the county for the future. I'm going to do a brief study refresher to just remind everybody what the Comp and Class study is about and what we're trying to achieve. And I'll talk about today's objectives as well. After I speak, Nancy Berkeley will come up. She is the project manager from Evergreen Solutions, and she's going to provide a company overview, talk about the methodology they bring to the project, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail about how we determine comparative agencies, who we compete against in the market, who we compete with for labor. And she'll go into a bit about that, and she'll also provide a status update, again, what we've done so far and what's upcoming before the board. And Mark Watson's going to close us out, and he's going to talk about our mission and guiding principles, and that'll be the foundation that we build the final recommendation to the board on. So to begin with, our team we're preparing to put together the presentation, and we've done a lot of research as how can we really set the stage as far as why it's so important for the county to be very intentional about addressing this type of project. And we found a quote from the Local Government Research Collaborative. And it says, with 4 to 5 generations in the workforce today and the continued wave of retirements over the next decade, the challenges of attracting and retaining talent have never been greater. Slow, stodgy, and standardized practices simply won't work. The governments that will win the talent race are those that adapt to changing times, anticipate their workforce needs, share great stories about the opportunities of working for their organizations, and invest in and engage their employees. So we thought this was a good table set for the conversation we're going to have today. So I mentioned earlier the strategic initiatives. We had a meeting in February of 2017 with our division directors and executive directors talking about what the county's going to be working on this year. And we really had a lot to do. I mean, they are really big projects, but I think they've been successful and are going to add a lot of value to the county. So first is our Comp and Class study, and we'll talk obviously about that more in depth today. But working alongside that was our strategic workforce planning project, and that was a real robust effort by staff to kind of take a look at our employees. What are the skills we have on hand? Do we have any pending retirements? Do we have any vulnerabilities in our staff currently? What do we need to address to prepare for the next 5 to 10 years from a workforce planning standpoint? And so our executive directors actually presented to the county manager about 2 weeks ago, I believe, and highlighted some of the vulnerabilities that they found in their service area. So we're going to go meet with the EDs, our little workforce planning project team. We're going to meet with the executive directors and talk about some strategies on how we can prepare the organization for the next 5 to 10 years and what we need to do as far as staff development, training, knowledge transfers, and things like that. Lastly, the Customer Service Standards Project was, again, another really robust initiative on behalf of the county. Through that project, we've trained every employee in Union County on what the customer service expectations are for the organization. What is our culture of customer service, and what do we value as a county in terms of how our customers should be served every day through the service that we provide. And so the list on the left, these are obviously our strategic initiatives. These are the goals that we hope all these initiatives touch in a positive way for the organization, so that we can improve how we operate and prepare for the future. So the question is, why conduct a compensation and classification study? We put together this graphic on the left-hand side, which obviously tells a pretty clear picture. It's been, well, 1996 was the last time the Union County ever did a formal comp and class study. So that's 21 years in the labor market that we have not truly known exactly where we fit from a competitive standpoint. And you'll see kind of noted in the middle, what HR has had to do is do some individual one-offs, where they'll work with a department, work with a division, to try to deal with a compensation issue, a classification concern, to address competitiveness from a division or a single classification level. But again, not a full, robust, countywide initiative. So now we're doing that today. I think it's definitely time to do that. I think we'll find a lot of benefit from it. So the study goals, just some general reasons why we did the study. One thing we need to do is assess and improve our ability to attract and retain high-performing employees. Another thing is we want to ensure that our job descriptions actually reflect the jobs that employees do. I think we have several classifications in the county that job has morphed and grown into other things, and the classification description doesn't fit that, so we want to clean that up. We also want to evaluate our salary structure for internal equity and external competitiveness. And we also want to formalize a set of principles that provide a foundation for a sustainable compensation and classification system. So we just want to touch briefly on what the Union County process means to us. It was very important when we went through the interviews with the consultant firms who responded to the RFP, and we worked with Evergreen too. We wanted them to understand that we wanted something that was unique to Union County, something that addressed our needs. So we just called it the Union County process. And just a few key points of what that meant to us. So what we did, we made sure that employees and management staff were engaged in the process. We did management interviews, we did focus group sessions with employees to get their feedback on how they perceive our comp and class structure. What is their opinion of how we're structured right now? We did orientations, an online webinar and in-person orientation, so employees could come and ask questions about the study. We would try to answer those as best we can. We also did a comp and class FAQ page on our County Connect, where they can ask questions of staff at any time if they have any concerns about the process or need more information, where we provide that to them. Another thing we wanted to do was make sure that we gave clear guidance to the consultant that the project needs to be focused on county commission and county management values. A few of those being fiscally conservative and sustainable, and that they would be fair to employees across the board. Last one we wanted to do was make sure that we address current and future staffing challenges facing Union County in the next 5 to 10 years. As staff, we kind of have an idea of what we think we're going to face, so we wanted to make sure that this project and this program address those. Some of those being retirements in critical service areas where we have a lot of management members who have been leaders in the organization for a long time who could retire within the next 5 years. So we need to prepare for that and be ready when that time comes. And also look at areas where employee turnover has been an issue or is becoming an issue. So this is just a general graphic. We wanted to show the board that as a staff, we work very collaboratively to make sure that we hear everyone and work together as a team to build our mission statement and guiding principles. The vision statement was really our backdrop to the whole program. That is the county vision statement. We want to make sure that everything we do fits within the vision statement. So with that collaborative approach, we've built the mission and guiding principles that you guys will see today. And from that standpoint, based on our conversation, we'll be able to come up with a compensation and classification program that will lead Union County into the future. So today's objectives, the County Commission will receive a project status update. We'll do the presentation of the compensation mission statement and guiding principles, have some Q&A around that, and then at the end we would ask for acceptance and adoption of those core principles that will help us build the final recommendation for the board. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy, Project Manager with Evergreen.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Nancy Berkeley with Evergreen Solutions. Evergreen Solutions is based in Tallahassee, and we are recognized as a national public sector consulting firm. We've done work in 45 states and over 300 plus of these compensation classification studies. I'm going to pause right there though for a minute, because we've done a lot of compensation and classification studies. We don't just do, I call it cookie cutter comp class studies. We do use the exact same methodology for all of the studies that we do, which I'm going to talk about in a minute here. But we do very specific common class studies. We have to understand what position you want to be in the market and things like that. Things that Michael mentioned beforehand that set the stage for us. So it was a good interviewing process to select us as Evergreen, and then a good process set up to give us some framework for that. So we pride ourselves, I personally pride myself too, on delivering the best, solidly based data, on data that we've collected, recommendations back to whoever we're working with, in this case, of course, Union County, that's specific to Union County, because every single place is different, has its own unique needs, has its own unique guiding principles, etc. So again, extensive work, same methodology for all of our studies that we do in all of our public sector. We only consult in the public sector. We have extensive human resources experience on our team of highly professional consultants. We have data analysts, we have people with HR experience, etc. My personal background, I spent 30 plus years as a HR practitioner. So I bring, if you will, to the table, I would say the HR practitioner side of, I'm not just a consultant, if you will. I understand the practical side of going through, if the study recommendations are approved, through implementation. This is just a short list, or a shorter list of some of our North Carolina experience. Gaston County, New Hanover, Guilford, Cape Fear Public Utility Authority. I actually directed all of those studies. The city school, Chapel Hill, Carrboro City Schools, and Chatham Public Schools. I didn't direct those. I don't work as much in the public school sector. That's again what I mentioned with our methodology, that we use the same methodology when we're doing common class studies in the public schools as well. The public sector organizations that we have surveyed in our salary survey to attain what we call the external equity data are listed here. We did ask for a couple of other cities that didn't respond, and mainly a couple of other cities that didn't respond. Now, this list comprises what we're going to refer to, or I'm going to refer to as competitors, those within general proximity, 60, 70 miles, are what we would call competitor organizations. Why? Because that's the distance an employee could reasonably expect to drive without having to another organization, hopefully not, without having to relocate. Whether or not you do or do not actually lose people to those, they are generally considered competitor organizations. Have similar service delivery demands, comparable classifications. We want to make sure that when we're comparing the classifications that we've surveyed, that we're comparing work to work. So as long as we can compare work to work with an organization, they give us data, we actually send a survey out. They give us a match. They tell us whether it's a high, medium, or low match. And even with that, if we don't believe it's any of those, we don't even use it. Okay, so we do some cleaning of the data before we ever enter it into our big spreadsheet, if you will, of collecting this data. But we're looking for, some of these might be comparable organizations as well. How can we do that? They might be able to have a higher cost of living. We will or have adjusted all of the data for cost of living too, to make it so that it's the same as if you were living in Union County. So we, first of all, don't enter data that's not comparable into our salary survey. And then we clean it, if you will, to make sure that it is compared work to work. We adjust it for cost of living. Again, those that might be facing similar demographic challenges in workforce planning, as Michael just mentioned. So these are, this is a list of all of the peers that we collected data from. We look to get at least 5 responses for every benchmark classification. We don't survey all classifications. We survey, in this case, it was 90 plus classifications on your list of classifications to get the data, and want at least 5 responses for each one of those classifications. so that it is valid data. That comprises the market data for the external equity portion of this. Completed so far, and this is a little bit busy, but I'm going to take you through pretty high level of the tasks completed so far. We conducted what we call employee outreach, where we conducted, not only did we what we call employee orientation meetings, where we described what the study was about. We asked everybody all of the employees to participate in a process of completing something we call a job assessment tool, where they would, and they did complete job assessment tool telling us what that work is that they were doing. So going back to the work to work, if they were doing work that was broader than their current job classification description would define, then we capture that or hopefully captured that if the employee put that into the JAT. The supervisor also reviewed that and was able to just comment, not change anything that the employee put as to whether or not that was appropriate. So we described that process, and then, if you will, we kicked that off the following weeks, which they were completing that JET. Also during outreach, we collected some information in focus group meetings with leaders, to find out what were the things that were concerns with regard to compensation classification for the county. We saw the same things that were generally here, quite frankly, for most of the organizations. I've been doing this work now almost 5 years. Pretty much the same thing. You know, it's good, stable work, like working here, like the people they work with. Some concern about some compression of some salaries, maybe towards the lower end of the salary ranges. Some concerns, again, these are perceptions, again, of the employees, and some concerns about the fact that they were doing a broader or jobs that I sometimes refer to as maybe a combination of a few jobs that they weren't doing, 5 or 6 years ago. And was that appropriately being captured in a classification description, and or the pay relative to that? So, and I would say that came out probably quite consistently. So again, that does come up other places. I'd say that was kind of one of the themes here, which leads me to say maybe you're doing that work where you're having an organization that does a little more on the lean side, trying to do a little bit more of those combination jobs. Okay, so we have to take that into consideration when we're doing the study. We reviewed the county's compensation mission statement and guiding principles. Very, very important. I know that's a presentation that Mark's going to give here afterwards. Absolutely critical, I believe, to the success, other than us doing a good job with collecting the data of this study. Understanding what the county sees as the mission, us understanding your mission, us understanding your compensation mission and guiding principles, absolutely, and being on the same page, if you will, absolutely critical. So for instance, when we were comparing the data that we collected for the salary survey, where do you want us to compare it to? Where do you want to be in the market? Okay, so if you want to be competitive, it's generally compared to the average or the median. So that's what we were looking at. So things like that, absolutely critical, other than us just kind of coming up with what we think is the best thing. That would not be a good idea. So very critical to the success of the study and the work that we've done absolutely to date. We analyzed internal equity and developed proposed class structure. The internal equity, pause there for a second, that we analyze from a data perspective from the work when the employees complete this job assessment tool. From that, we can gather what a compensable factor score is for each and every classification. And that is what we did for the internal equity, based on compensable factors such as leadership, decision-making, working conditions, etc. So we analyzed every single classification really by employee, whether, what the compensable factor score was or a value for internal equity. And we also looked at, should we recommend any classification changes or structure? Again, going back to the mission statement and guiding principles, taking some of that guidance from the county of, do you want to sleek a little bit more, maybe not sleek, no, let me just say a little more flexible, more streamlined would probably be a better way of saying it, classification structure. Yes, so we're going to look for those opportunities more to do so, and that's what we did. So we checked that, analyzed internal equity, the external equity, the market competitiveness of the current pay system. We did that in what I mentioned from the previous slide by conducting a salary survey. And I think I forgot the reviewed conditions of the current pay system. I think I went right by that, I apologize. That was us looking at your current pay structure, your pay plans, and seeing what are the range width from the minimum to the maximum. How does that relate when we collected the market data to the peers? That's relevant when we make some of our recommendations. And we also looked at where employee salaries are now in that current structure. So when I mentioned before about the in outreach, employee outreach, some employees maybe being concerned about compression, did we see some potential clustering of employee salaries, one end or the other of the pay ranges? And we do. We see more clustering of those salaries, or we saw more clustering of those salaries at the beginning part or the first quartile of the salary range. I apologize, I forgot that out of order. Remaining, so getting these two pieces of data here, the tasks remaining, we're going to develop a new competitive pay structure, okay, at market, conservative, taking, hearing what you said before, conservative and favored. Taking the two internal equity and external equity, we're going to assign each classification that we've now recommended from this class structure a specific pay range, pay grade, pay range. So we individually slot every classification because some classifications may have been more or less, I'll call it, behind the market. And some, while we may get some external data that says should be at this place, internally it's either valued more, those compensable factors, or maybe a little different. So we're actually taking data points from internal equity and external equity, marrying the two together, mathematically actually, with regression, and coming up with predicted values of where we'd actually slot those positions. We don't just stop at that because we've got to still use our brains a little bit to see if it all makes sense, but that's what we use to assign each classification a pay range. So new pay plan, individually slotting positions, not just, okay, to distinguish, because some people sometimes think that we're taking your current and just moving it over by X. We're new plan, fitting in with your guiding principles, and then competitive, and then individually making those slotting for each classification. Then we're going to develop and recommend options for implementing the new pay structure by taking current employee salaries and coming up with different options for recommending how to place those your current employee salaries in that new structure. And there's various options to doing that. We want to give you the best options, maybe option ultimately, if you will, kind of work towards a recommended option that best fits, again, your guiding principles, your mission statement from a compensation standpoint. In other words, let me say it this way. We would not want to give you a recommendation that places everybody and current employee salaries in a new pay plan based on just their time in a classification, if that were not how you're going to progress salaries in the future. So we don't want to give you a recommendation, put people's salaries in the new pay plan different than or counter to your mission statement and guiding principles for compensation. We want to be more aligned and or neutral to that. So we'll discuss that more when I'm actually back to give you the presentation of the results, but we want to align that. We don't want to just give you something that is counter to or doesn't work with what you have in mind, okay? And then we're going to calculate the associated annualized salary costs for implementation as well. Provide compensation administration related recommendations. That is everything from recommendations for how often, to conduct a salary survey. This total one is what we call this compensation and classification study, or what you might do in the meantime to keep up the maintenance on it, if you will. And then as well with associated pay practices. So give you some, again, recommendations based again on what you're seeing from guiding principles for pay practices. This can be anything from promotions, new hire salary practice, etc. And then we will be providing you a draft report, study report, and final report after that, and revise all of the job descriptions or classification descriptions as well. Again, I've mentioned it a couple times, this mission statement and guiding principles has provided and continues to provide us the framework for the study. A couple of observations to date that we've made with just that piece of the primarily the external market and the internal, I should say, actually, internal equity. Some classifications could be titled more broadly. Try to give you a little bit more flexibility or enable employees to see, okay, if I want to go from this level position, and it's broadly called this, maybe an administrative clerical type of position, I could move over to this other department, maybe if there are no opportunities here, and it's called the next level as opposed to some specific title that's utilized by that department. So create in a couple of areas maybe some broader type of classifications, which is something we see in the market today as well. Salary survey data showed some varied market positions. Some positions were, ahead of the market, if you will. Some maybe just kind of right at the market, and some may have been a little bit more lagging the market. But again, that in and of itself obviously plays into the recommendations, but we take that internal equity as well into consideration. So, I wanted to point out that the level of engagement and contribution of the leadership staff here at the county and the staff and the group of people, staff, HR, et cetera, that I'm working with from a study team, if you will, has been, and I'm absolutely convinced will be, the key to a successful study. I absolutely would say that you were, if not the top, in the top 3 organizations that I've worked with that give this much attention on the front end of the study, during the study, which is excellent. Because at the end of the studies, sometimes I'm presenting something, and all of a sudden people are on a different page, as much as we try to get to that. And people have a different understanding or idea sometimes of where should salaries be. I always call it, where should they be? Well, they should be where you, as a county, want them from a guiding, mission statement and guiding principles, and how you progress them, and et cetera. So the more we understand, and the engagement that I've seen, I was here to work with the leadership team on understanding this, I just can't get over how much involvement and how critical that is to what I believe is a successful study. We've got to do our job, which I commit to you, we absolutely will, with the data piece and collecting that and analyzing and giving you recommendations. But the work here is absolutely critical too. So I certainly appreciate that and applaud you for what you're doing in that regard.
Thank you.
I think it's fair to say that we have gotten our money's worth from Nancy, because we have tested her at every step of the way in this project. So to review our objectives for today, review the project status, now the presentation of the mission statement and the guiding principles. Again, as Michael has pointed out earlier, this is a very intentional process, one thing building upon another. The mission statement and the guiding principles built upon the vision statement of the county. As Nancy alluded to, these mission statement and the guiding principles, she led a workshop for the executive directors and the leadership team, senior management, and where we brought together our collective ideas. Everybody comes with their own set perspective on this topic, their own experience. So we spent a good portion of the day talking about those different perspectives and those different expectations, and then how does that relate to the work we do today, the vision statement that's been adopted by the county, and where we need to go as an organization. And so at the end of the day, there was a mission statement that was crafted, a draft, along with many factors that summarize the expectations going forward. And that eventually has developed into these guiding principles. So it has been a collaborative process. It does provide the framework and foundation for the study, and it's not based on one person's expectations, but it is a collaborative effort. And this is it. And you were provided this material earlier in the day, so no doubt you've read through this one time. The mission statement, Union County is committed to providing fair, market competitive compensation that attracts, retains, rewards qualified, highly engaged employees that are dedicated to delivering quality service to the community. Okay? That mission statement ties directly back to the county's vision statement. Now the guiding principles, as you can see, we have 5 of those, and I will flip to the next slide to get into the specifics on the guiding principles. The first being to provide a total compensation system of salary and benefits that's based on market rates, internal equity, and the ability to fund. We all know that each year the funding of compensation is a topic of conversation. Some years it's funded at different rates, but how do you make a competitive compensation system work when there are lean years that are very lean, when maybe the county's not able to provide increases in compensation? You remember those years, right? And then there have been years when we have been able to provide more funding for the compensation system. So how do we make that work and retain our competitive position? These are the hows, the whys, the whys of the principle. Why do we have that principle? We want to attract and retain highly skilled and experienced staff. This is a big one. It helps us to preserve institutional knowledge. The leakage, I'll call it the leakage of institutional knowledge, can be crippling to the organization if it's not managed. We've had a lot of retirements in the organization, and sometimes we do a good job of managing through that, and sometimes we don't. But going forward, this will help us, along with the Strategic Workforce Planning Project. This will help to preserve that institutional knowledge. Another one is deliver high quality service through the high quality staff. The second principle, administer sustainable, consistent countywide practices that allow management to react to changing labor markets as necessary to hire, promote, and retain top talent. So, again, the whys: create starting salaries that enable the recruitment of employees with the skill sets we need to deliver the services in a growing county and an evolving organization. We are a lean organization, and often we have to recruit experienced, skilled labor, talent, employees, however you want to describe that, in order to provide the services that are needed. I think Ed Yashicki will be the first one to stand up and tell you about how it is to try to recruit seasoned engineers and how difficult that is in the current labor market. Retain competent and effective staff to ensure the organizational stability. That point also ties back to the workforce planning project. And reduce those productivity losses and associated costs due to turnover. And I know it's sometimes, let's say, that point often gets glossed over, and it is hard often to put a cost to the cost of turnover, and what does it mean in productivity losses, especially in a public service organization like ours. But I will tell you, it can be crippling. It can be crippling when you have staff leave the organization, take the institutional knowledge with them, and perhaps they have been the only person doing that job for a while. It can be crippling to the organization. The third one, provide appropriate salary growth to the market rate for competent and effective employees. You want to recognize and reward the valued contribution of these employees through competitive compensation, and make adjustments in their compensation based on the evaluation of their performance. Fourthly, administer a clearly defined classification structure that's streamlined, easy to understand by the employees, elected officials, and the public. Nancy spoke to that when she talked about one of her findings is our classification titles that maybe need to be broader in scope than they currently are. Simplify the classification structure, improve the understanding of county operations, and define those career paths through the streamlined classification structure. Again, ties back to the workforce and strategic planning process. And lastly, but not least, review the compensation classification structure and associated practices at regular intervals. It's important to continue to align and adopt this process or adapt this process in the future and not have it go stagnant. Part of that is, what drives us? Why do we do this? Why is it necessary to do this, and how do we do this? All of those things, those questions get wrapped up in the mission statement that supports the strategic needs of the county. The development of new administrative guidelines. Currently, we have a personnel resolution that gives general authorities and gives some generally broad guidelines to this topic of compensation and the management of classification. From time to time, we need to be more specific than just getting really broad in that direction. So we propose developing new administrative guidelines to address that. Regularly review the compensation classification study. We certainly don't need to wait 2 decades before we do this again, and update the administrative guidelines on a frequent basis. All right, so to wrap this up, the mission statement and guiding principles provide a framework for the final recommendations that will be coming to the Board of County Commissioners. It's important for staff, the leadership team, senior management, to know which direction we are going in, where we are headed, how we will get there. It's not good enough just to have a general concept and say, well, we believe we should head in this direction over here, but there's no roadmap to get there. Okay? The mission statement and guiding principles gives us the framework for bringing the recommendations. It gives us the direction we need to manage a lean and efficient organization and provide that governing tool to ensure that the compensation classification structure remains a strategic focus in the future. And now comes the time for questions. Are there any questions about how this process has been developed, how the study's been going? For myself, Michael, Nancy, any of the folks in the room can chime in and answer your questions.
Vice Chairman?
Will there be a follow-on meeting like today to discuss in more detailed findings? Example, during Nancy's presentation, she talked about how to implement. There's various options for implementation. Hear those kind of details?
Absolutely, there will be.
We will not bring it to you and asking for final a decision without going through those processes.
But again, those options, okay, the mission statement, the guiding principles help get us going in the right direction so that we're not bringing you options that are so broad in spectrum that it just becomes impossible for the board to really make a determination of what they want.
Mr. Simpson?
What's our current turnover rate? And do you have any idea what our retirement or anticipated retirement rate will be, manager level and above, 5 years from now? How many are poised for retirement?
Those are good questions, and our general turnover rate has hovered anywhere from 10 to 13%, depending on the year. If you drill down to division level, you may find turnover rates in the 1-2% maybe, and going up to maybe the 20-25%. Retirement rates we track, or potential retirements, we actually have a very colorful spreadsheet that's maintained by division, by employee, so we know where our gaps, where our risks are. That was actually part of the process for the strategic workforce planning, is planning for those gaps. Where do we have our gaps today? In 5 years, where are we going to have our gaps? In 10 years, where are we going to have those gaps? We can typically retire out of this organization anywhere from 40 to 60 a year.
And at the management level over the next 5 years, I would say we're very susceptible.
You're probably talking in the 40 to 50% range. And when you talk about management, that drills all the way down to the division director level.
What's the bench process look like? How are we developing these employees so that when these folks retire, that we have somebody in place? Are we enticing further education? Are we cross-training? What's that look like?
Yes. We actually have a very, I'll say, extensive management development program. It lasts anywhere from 6 to 9 months. Employees are hand-selected based on their performance and their ability and their drive, and we have had, last year, before we had some retirements and some turnover, we had put every supervisor in the organization through that program. We've been doing that now going on the 4th year. it has reaped benefits. We have a number of individuals that have been promoted to division director or executive director level. I think I'm right in saying that, executive director level, in the organization from that program. And basically the focus of that program is you have in a lean organization, you may have folks that are very, they're great technicians, they're subject matter experts, they're great at the technical professional work they do, but they may not have been exposed to budget development. They may not have been exposed to some of the softer skills. I don't really like that word, but you know, it's the term. The soft skills, the management skills they have to have in order to be the leader. How do they see themselves in the organization? How do others see themselves? It asks them a lot of those introspective types of questions that develop them as managers and leaders. So we actually have some nationally recognized speakers that come in and provide this training. We utilize the university system or universities that are around and close by. We had a professor with Queens College in here this past week for a couple of days. So it's a good program. It would be hard to say you could find that anywhere else.
And how often is that? Is that an ongoing program?
It's an ongoing annually.
So how often are new employees enrolled in that? Is it every year then?
It's annually. It takes a year to get somebody all the way through the process.
So we have like our emerging leaders, we have first-time supervisors, we have additional training for our division directors, we have every now and then training with probably the executive directors, the least amount of training, but we've got trying to resource our dollars to the best possible use. And then we have other general training, just skill sets as it relates to through the community college, Microsoft and Excel, and trying to develop some of those skill sets. So with the variety, and we'd be happy to share all the programs that we have with the board, the variety of training that this organization offers and that we've developed over the last 4 years, and I give a great deal of credit to HR and to Donna Del Cilandro that really heads up this program, is that I think she could squeeze blood out of a turnip, and it's amazing that she will read a book, call the author, and they'll be here teaching our next class. And it truly is amazing the resources that we've been able to find and to utilize as part of our training program. And that is kind of mirrored with the whole workforce strategic plan that we have been working on, because it's kind of got a twofold approach. One is, what are our existing gaps in the organization? Where do we have skill sets that we need to meet the needs of our community that we're not able to provide, that we don't have someone who has those particular skill sets? And then what employees could potentially leave our workforce, and how do we do the transfer of knowledge to make sure that they are not the only person with that knowledge base? And we've been working on that since spring. I think we started working on that. There was, the initial presentations were about 2 weeks ago to me, and then as Michael indicated, they're going back to each of the executive directors, and we'll continue to build upon that. So we know well where we need to add specific skill sets within organizations.
So you said this has been going on for the last 4 years?
Our training program, yes.
Okay, so at the end of the training program, if it does have an end date, I'd be curious, of those folks that have completed that training or gone through that training, are we retaining those employees, or are we in fact training these employees for them to go find other jobs because of lack of compensation? Or
I think in large part we retain the employees. I will say that for some employees it's an eye-opener, because they think they want more responsibility. We've had a couple of people that have gone through the program and I want to be a manager, I want to be a supervisor, I want to take on it. and they get into the training and they figure out that, hey, maybe I'm over my head, or maybe this is not what I really want to do. But otherwise, they're very talented. They have a lot of skills at what they do, but they decide, this is going into management is not what I want to do. And so we've had, which has been really good, because it helps us to identify where we may have some gaps that we didn't perceive that we did.
And what's the number, or how often do these comp and class studies typically occur in some of our peer organizations? I mean, obviously 20 years is probably not the norm, I wouldn't think.
5 would be as soon as you would do it. 10 is probably the average.
Yes, 5 is what we recommend. 3 to do 3 years, maybe what I call a more simple compensation update, not necessarily the full classification. You can do, we've done some compensation updates for just taking a quick look, maybe you need to adjust the plan. It's not as, full, but 5 years, yes, would be what we recommend.
And I think, I think it's been alluded to a couple of times so far. The thing that has made this particular project different, it's been such a collaborative effort, which is, from what I'm familiar with and what I hear going on at other peer organizations, where the process is either driven by one person or one department, and it really sometimes does not have the outcomes that the organization needs or wants or desires, or they thought they were getting something, but they really get something different. This has been such a collaborative effort that it's been it's been a pleasure to work on, actually.
I guess I'm sorry to be asking me questions, but to kind of piggyback on what Vice Chairman Helms asked, when you bring back options, I guess I have some fear that not having a comp and class study in the last 20 years, we may be facing some astronomical number to bring folks up to market wages. Will those options be presented in maybe multi-year? Is it going to be 1 year? I mean, what's this going to look like?
I would anticipate, and not seeing any results, but I would anticipate you would probably have to do something similar to what you had to do with the sheriff's office, which was a multi-year implementation. And there are different strategies you can take as it relates to your present employees and where they are in the pay band, and how you, if we do have compression issues, how you ease those compression issues. I'll just give you an example. The last county that I worked for, we did a compensation and classification study. I think it was in '07, and probably hadn't done one in almost as many years as we have done one. The price tag range, and it was an organization of 1,400 employees. Price tag ranged from, I think it was 2.8 million to 7 million. So what we did is we then said, okay, what can we truly afford and what is fair to the employees? So you go through a process of saying, and you noticed in the slide that, I think it was Michael's slide, or maybe been Mark's slide, as to, there's an affordability component of this as well. And so that when all those results come back, that is part of the, yes, we want to be competitive, yes, there needs to be internal equity, but there also has to be an ability to fund the program. And so, and that's why you all are such a key component of all of this.
Well, I just don't want us to go through all this and then we get a price tag and it's all of a sudden we have buyer's remorse.
I think we can always manage the price tag.
Okay.
That's my belief, having gone through this in a couple of organizations before here, is that we were always able to take the results and manage the price tag through the implementation phase so that it was affordable.
I've gone through several of these as well, and what I found is, it's not, everyone across the board is going to get an increase.
Right.
Some will find that they're actually at the very top end of their range. So it's not a given that everyone will get that increase, but it's going to be kind of a blend.
And that's been my experience as well, is that although all of your workforce may anticipate they are, I've never seen even one that had gone 20 years or almost 20 years without one, that no, we did not have all of our workforce that was out of market. We had some a little bit above, some that were right at market, and some that were below.
And right now, I'm assuming that we have ranges for each of our classifications.
We do.
And so this will kind of identify if that range is where it should be.
Well,
Change
they're actually
the
going to
range.
probably be recommending changing your ranges.
Right.
The overall minimum and maximum of your ranges, and then assigning classifications to each of those ranges, which may be very different from what classifications are assigned to those ranges now.
And I think Nancy mentioned earlier that, if I understood correctly, that we would align this similar to maybe like the government has class 1 or class 3, so that if you work in this department and you want to look at maybe learning something different, you know, if you're looking at a class 3, you're still kind of in the same range. Is that, am I understanding that right?
I'm going to let, I think I know what Nancy was talking about, but I'm going to let her answer it.
I'm not certain that's exact, if I said it like that, it might not be exact.
You probably didn't, but that's kind of what I heard.
What I meant was more of a, let's just take, and I'm going to use administrative clerical positions that right now are uniquely classified in some areas in a department. But when you read the essential duties, the content of the essential duties, of course they're doing something specific in a department versus whatever, but the essential duties, are they, preparing reports, looking at whatever, have different levels. So what we've come up with are some broad classification titles for those. So admin, something 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm in some department, I'm doing the specific work, but over in another department, there's service delivery area, there's an opportunity for a level 4. I'm not going to get there here. I know that the essential duties, I can read what those are. I'll have to learn something new that maybe I can apply and go over there, as opposed to having this unique title that's not very clear. That's what I meant. And there's a few opportunities to do that, other than just the admin.
So do we anticipate a reduction in the number of classifications?
Slight reduction in the number of classifications.
I think right now we have 300.
In the ballpark.
Yeah.
Do we have
I'm
300?
sorry. I should say, now, while I say that opportunity exists, you also didn't have what I would call a classification system that was so like, oh my gosh, sometimes I look at them and this needs a lot of work. So you're not going to see that much of a, okay, you're going from this many to that, because actually you do quite a good job in the classification structure, but there are some additional opportunities. So you'll see, I would say, some reduction, but not probably this dramatic thing, because you really didn't have a terrible one classification structure to begin with.
Because one of the things our system has presently, and I think when Nancy's talking about the administrative support sector, is that we'll have like an administrative secretary, public works, an administrative secretary, legal, an administrative secretary. Each of those are separate classifications. And so I believe when they've looked at them, they said the core functions are still the same. So having an administrative 1, 2, and 3 may make more sense based upon level of responsibility and provide you with the ability for some upward mobility that we may not have right now.
So would that 1, 2, and 3 have salary ranges within that?
Each one would have a separate salary range.
Do you do exit interviews with employees leaving?
Yes, we do.
Of that 10 to 13% you talked about, how many leave for salary?
That's a really good question. The exit surveys have been voluntary up until recently, when we totally revamped the process. We revamped the process in terms of how we are notified when a supervisor finds out they have an employee leaving. We now have a process where they send an electronic notification, it goes out to the organization. We're actually in touch with that employee, you know, if they give a standard 2 weeks notice, within a day or two after they give us that notice. So we're collecting better information than we were collecting in the past. And it's more of a structured process than it was in the past. Of the ones that actually completed the process in the past, which was totally voluntary, about half of them didn't fill out the thing. Probably 50% would check the block that they were leaving for more money in addition to other items. So we asked them to give us the top three. Money's going to be there 50% of the time. That's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but that's where we're at right now. It's an issue.
Any other questions?
So we're going to close the sale.
Well, I certainly support, I mean, something we haven't done in 20 years. I think we owe it to the employees of this organization to examine that and at least be at market wage. And, not only to the employees, but to the citizens of the county to ensure that we're maintaining the best employees so that we can get the job that we're here to do done as efficiently and as timely as we can. So with that, I'll make a motion that we accept and adopt the proposed compensation and classification mission statement and guiding principles. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I move to recess the special meeting to reconvene at about 5:45 in the first floor conference room of the County Government Center. All in favor? Aye.